I've watched the entire cartoon Desperate Bakugan Fighters and it's f***ed up. The cartoon that gathered millions of fans around the world has 4 seasons and 189 episodes. Every kid in the 2000s knew what a Bakugan was and had at least one of those magnetic card balls. Good grief, even McDonald's did a collab with Bakugans. The series ran for almost 20 years on channels like Cartoon Network and TV Tokyo, and it all started when field cards and funny monsters started falling from the sky to the ground. They were picked up by kids all over the world, and that's how the game Bakugan was invented. Each of them had their own element and ability. And the villain of the first part of the season was Bakugan Naga, threatening their dimension called Westroy, but the team of desperate Bakugan fighters, led by Dan and his Bakugan Drago, stepped up for our land. Well, to understand the whole plot, let's break down his past and rewind time. The Code of Life, aka the god of all things Bakugan, gave birth to light and darkness, in the form of Dragonoid and Arachnoid. They were the catalyst, their battle splitting the dimension in two. Dragonoid existed in the new Vestroia, which is also divided into the worlds of the 6 elements, and at the core are 2 zones, the Silence Zone, a destructive and dark force, and the Infinity Zone, a force of creation and light for the Bakugans. The Darachnoid dimension is divided into 2 worlds, Nifia, based on the energy of light, and Gandelia, on dark energy. There also live Gandelians, people who really want to enslave Nifia, but more on that later. There is also a death dimension in Westroy, created to balance the Bakugans, if one of them loses control or loses on a special field map. But how did the Bakugans get into our dimension on Earth and other planets? Yes, everything is simple, all to blame for a mistake in the research of scientist Michael, who was engaged in the creation of teleporters, which seemingly should simply teleport one object from point A to point B, but everything went wrong. The device opened a portal to Vestroia, from which maps of the fields in which various monsters lurked came into our world. In the human world, however, they existed in the form of balls. And Michael himself was sucked into Vestroia. Naga, essentially the villain of Season 1, realized it was time to act. Combine the Infinity Zone and the Silent Zone to gain absolute power and rewrite the energy balance of the entire Vestroia, and then the entire universe. Michael made it back to Earth, and children all over the world collected Bakugans. Den and his internet friends create a game of Bakugan and have fun like a normal kid, not realizing that there is a whole universe behind the game. Also of note are Runo, Julie, Alice, Marucho, and Den himself, who is later joined by Shun, who is number 1 in the rankings as the strongest fighter. Meanwhile, Drago tries to stop Naga without the elemental Bakugan who wants to absorb the Silent Zone with the help of a teleportation card. The power absorption caused an explosion, causing the boundaries between the different elemental worlds to be erased. During Den's fight, Drago suddenly enters the map, fighting Darkest Bakugan and gaining the upper hand. Children all over the world tell stories about talking Bakugans. Den tries to talk to his silent friend too, he's a bit of an underdog. A mysterious hero called The Mask appears. He wins battles and sends the Bakugans to the dimension of death. The antagonist also tells us that every fight is real for the Bakugans. Den though tries to understand Drago but remains not entirely honest with his partner. For him it's just a game, but for Drago it's the loss of his comrades. So in episode 3 he throws Drago into the water and decides to play alone. The characters, though not immediately, take sides with each other. They also learn that Mask has begun to wage remote warfare, giving death cards to Dan's opponents to fight for him. The next arc will focus on Dan's friends, specifically getting to know Runo and Marucho. The girl, though fiery, but it is obvious that she has romantic feelings for Dan, where without them in the series for children. And she finds a new friend, Tigrera. Marucho is the son of a rich daddy who makes money demolishing schools. The writers must have put that in there for a reason. According to the law of the genre, a clown must appear and he is here too. It's Aqua's praise. At the beginning of the 7th episode, he gets on a bird and flies wherever he goes. Later he becomes Marucho's Bakugan and helps him to defeat pop singers with death cards. Julie is a Nepha girl and gains a Subterra Golem, while Alice is left without a Bakugan as she is under the influence of a Naga. The team meets at Dan's house and they discuss forming a resistance team to stop Mask and Naga from conquering both centers. However, the strength of the 4 children is not enough, as they need to gather all 6 elements, specifically Ventus and Darkus. The choice of course fell on Shun as he is the strongest fighter on the table. That's why in episode 11, Marucho and Rune infiltrate Shun's house and go through his grandfather's traps. Naturally, the main tsundere of the series cannot be persuaded to cooperate, so they have to fight with him. But you can't win over him. Shun also has a hard life story. His mother is very sick and lives in the hospital, and his grandfather is always trying to impose the teachings of Ninja Grandson. So he will refuse the desperate fighters for a while, but still agrees. The desperate Bakugan fighters find the doors to the Vestroya and defeat the strongest fighters from around the world who are pitted against them by the mask. All the while he fights and pumps up his darkest Hydronoid as his life force grows with each fight. And every Bakugan in the Death Zone feeds the power of the darkest Hydronoid, a contender for the title of the strongest Bakugan in the world. Drago also tries to keep up, so he first evolves into a Delta Dragonoid when he escapes the Fire Sphere. Dan decides to go up against the mask, hoping to win after evolving. However, the Stylist had his own trump card on his hands. The Hydronoid had also evolved into a two-headed monster, which also affected the power stats. Drago had no such fighting power, and he, along with Den, falls into the Dimension of Death. The friends, led by Shun, summon the mask and offer him a 5-man fight. This is noticed by Den's mother, however her eyes the children disappeared a second later, and I will remind you that time flows faster in the Bakugan world. The heroes set off after Dan, and Mask brutally informs the mother that all the kids have gone to the other side of the world. The 6 legendary warriors of Vestroya offer the heroes a deal in which they will help them escape from the Dimension of Death, but they will have to save Vestroya from Naga, as well as undergo tests to overcome their childhood traumas. Everyone agrees and a new arc begins, with Julie facing her past and her failures as a child, where she was her sister's shadow. Marucho was frustrated by his parents' attitude towards him, because of his studies and pursuit of development, he could not have friends, and in response could only squeeze out a smile. Well, and separately, I would like to praise localizers for the gifted voice Barunov, Presu. To watch in voiceover and hear his voice is always very funny. Shun meets a mini version of his mother who picked up a Bakugan, as part of a challenge of course. His point turns out to be acceptance of his mother's severe illness and that he needs to live his life, not just pine and care for her. Skyrus evolves, and we move on to Runo, whose challenge was to accept her stubbornness. Dan, on the other hand, had a tough time, as he had to fight all of his comrades and win, so that Drago could become the strongest Dragonoid. This is a good example of how to interest the viewer, because just to show how monsters transform into something cooler is not enough. So the authors create a kind of symbiosis of man and Bakugan. So along with the Bakugans, the personalities of our fighters grow. Now that the team is stronger, Dan throws a rematch to Mask, defeats Darkest the Hydronoid, and dispels the spell of the Silent Zone. The identity of the antagonist is revealed. It turns out to be Alice, and the realization of Nagi's influence on the heroes comes. Grandfather became Hell G, and Alice became Mask. Naga deliberately created the other personalities to set the plan in motion. There is not much time left before she appears on Earth, and a portal to the Vestroyu opens in the ocean, creating a huge vortex. The heroes say goodbye to their loved ones and head off to another world together. The dimensions begin to merge with each other, causing cataclysms in the world of humans and Vestroy. Desperate fighters fight the dimensions Bakugans and learn that Naga has beaten them, and together with other players from Earth, they stand up to protect Wave, Naga's sister, whose body is imprisoned with the power of the Infinity Zone. However, to win against the Naga, Drago attacks the Wave, obtains the Infinity Zone, unites with all the elements and destroys the Naga, thus absorbing both cores. He informs that he, along with the other Bakugans, will now have to travel back. Drago will become the center of the new Vestroy, in the image and likeness of the Earth, where all Bakugans can live in harmony. This is where the characters say goodbye, and perhaps here, if it weren't for the series being so popular, the story might have ended. But why all the other Bakugans also went home and did not stay with their friends? Because to get to New Vestroyu they will not be difficult, and at other times, because Grandpa Alice has long invented a teleporter, and given that at the second end is always Drago, the problem with teleportation becomes insignificant. I remember the first season very well, as I was building up a collection of Bakugans myself and had the double-sided ones, angel-type ones. Write a comment where your Bakugans were, it will be interesting to read. New Vestroya is facing a new danger, the ruler of the planet Vestal. Xenagil decided to colonize Vestroya. He erected several cities around the world and irradiated the entire Earth with unknown energy. Bakugan began to turn into a sphere again without resistance. Drago and 6 ancient warriors helped to separate from the center, having lost most of all his forces. He asked for the help of Dan and Marucho, whose efforts they quickly find common ground with the resistance. Mira explains the new rules of the game on the planet. By the way, watch Marucho compliment the girls. She tells how her father was involved in the creation of the strongest Bakugan, and that their people considered them pets and held fights in the arena for the amusement of the public. The heroes make friends, and the next targets are the controllers, who made the Bakugans in the form of spheres. Mira finds out about this, so she runs away from her father and creates a front to liberate the Bakugans. It will also include Den, Marucho, Baron, and Ace. They are later joined by Shun, who accidentally falls through a portal. As the former partners of the Desperate Fighters become the Prince's collection, Marucho finds himself an Aqua Selphia, and Shun finds himself a Ventus Ingram. They will be opposed by a team of Vestals with different elements, led by Spectra and his Bakugan Helios. Later, we also learn that he is Mira's brother. In the first series of fights, we will see a new type of trap, Bakugan, that Meilin will demonstrate for the first time, and another type is a Cyber Bakugan created in Mira's father's lab. Spectra challenges Dan to a fight, but if you thought it would end with the protagonist winning, it doesn't. Drago goes to Spectra for full control. The ancient Pyros warrior promises to help recover his friend, and together they wrestle Dragonoid away from Spectra. Mira, learning that her brother Kid is hiding behind a mask, abandons the resistance for the sake of brotherly bonds, and also learns that Kid has been driving them for us all along. Getting Drago for a short time was the plan, to get his DNA and create his own Dragonoid that can control all 6 elements and give him a fighting chance against the Vestal royal family to take over as ruler. Dan challenges Spectra to a fight. They put on battle suits and over the course of several episodes just need each other. The palace with the controller is destroyed. Prince Hydron learns of Spectra's betrayal. The heroes free their former partners, and Spectra along with Gaz conduct a tactical retreat. Xenagild goes to the 6 warriors to defeat them and get their life forces. However, before this happens, they hand her over to the resistance squad. The Bakugans evolve and go after Xenagild. Spectra makes a deal with Den, and together they stand up to fight the royal family. However, just getting out of the fight doesn't work. For on the ground, the king has a gift in store. Drago has to go into space with a bomb and absorb the energy, allowing him to evolve again, but into Helix the Dragonoid. Helios challenges Drago to a fight to see who is the stronger of the two. Naturally, the main character emerges victorious and takes on another ally. Kid turns away from his dark side and gets on the right path. Meanwhile, the king on his space shuttle, with the help of the scientist Clyde, finds an alternative, and according to the stories of this psycho, it will turn the tide of battle and help in the conquest of the entire universe. The heroes train at Bakugan Interspace, a Marucho-created facility where they can train their fighters without damage. The training time comes to an end and the desperate fighters get to the space station, and Kid, along with Helios, goes one-on-one with the king using the fighting mechanism on Helios. Clave reveals that he found the DNA of the strongest Bakugans. It was Nifia and Gandelia, and reconsiders his views and sides with his children. But the explosion of the station sends his father to the other side of the world. The fighters say goodbye to the Vestas, and that's the end of the second season. A more intense and complex story, backed up by new game mechanics. A final hook with information about Nithya and Gandelia, and there you have it, Season 3. Dan's family moves to Bayview City, and Marucho opens up Bakugan Interspace to everyone. This way, every kid in the world can teleport into a virtual space and show off their skills. In this, Marucho is aided by Ren, who quickly reveals his identity by talking about his homeland of Gandelia, trying to recruit Dan and his friends as allies. The boys believe him at first, but soon Fabia Shane, Princess of Nithya, shows up. She exposes Ren. In fact, Gandalia, represented by Emperor Barodius, is the invader, and Nithya is on the defensive. After a series of battles, the Earthlings side with Fabia and decide to help defend Nithya. Gandelia starts active actions on Earth. Her agents infiltrate Bakugan Interspace and capture it. Dan and his team try to regain control of the system by fighting against the Barodius-controlled fighters. By Ren's own assurance, the hypnotized fighters only fight at 75% of their full strength. We're also told in episode 10 about Ren's past, where his bloodline forced him to court a dark Bakugan, and they ended up there because of forbidden abilities that the Emperor feared. So they were exiled underground. When the Bakugan Interspace became too dangerous for ordinary people from Earth, the team co-opted the people of Nithya and went on the defense against the Gandelian attack. All the while, Barodius has been hunting for a sacred orb that grants a demigod level each. Drago also gets promoted when Neo and becomes Luminous Dragonoid, and then the Knights of the Sacred Sphere went to tell all the lore to our heroes. They try on cool costumes and go to deal with the invaders to get the power of the sphere. However, at this stage in the camp of the enemy, there were also traitors who did not have much faith in their Emperor Barodius. To be specific, Nerzak, one of the higher-ups, decided to betray him, and even came up with a key to get Barodius to make peace. However, he was betrayed by Kazarina to gain even more support for the Emperor. Ren also sides with the desperate fighters when he sees his friends being punished one by one for their failures by Barodius. He knew that because of Liehold's power he was being left alive, but it couldn't last much longer, and at the end of episode 24, he decides to help Nithya. Dragonoid Colossus, the guardian of the sphere, teleports Dan and Drago to another dimension where they are met by Nerzak. He explains to me, stupid man, that Drago is presented with the opportunity to defeat him and get the power of the sphere, but if he loses, the same awaits Darknoid, and if he wins, all the power will be in the hands of Barodius. Drago evolves into a killing machine, and more specifically a Blitz Dragonoid. Kazarina manages to copy Drago's DNA and tells Barodius about it, so let's start the evolutionary process and tear the desperate fighters apart. Of course, the Emperor likes to get his ass licked, so he boldly takes her on as his right-hand man. Gil, in essence a former sweet boy, could not stand it and stabbed Kazarina in the series finale, and together with her dies in the Keeper at the hands of Barodius, pre-quarterly threw Dan from a bird's-eye view on the ceiling window of the apartment. It would seem that this is defeat. Barodius has reached the castle of the ruler of Nithya. He is already threatening her with violence, but no. Dan manages to grab him by the handle and teleport with him to the Holy Sphere, which will tell the same story as it did 15 minutes ago. Through the Code of Lifelink, 2 pairs of fighters have access to the sphere, but only one will be able to get it. The heroes emerge victorious and Drago gains the power of his progenitor and evolves into a titanium dragonoid. Nithya thanks the desperate fighters for saving their world, and it was a real challenge, even with a ton of water and a protracted plot. It was a close call. They say goodbye to their battle comrades and set off for land, where Dan's mother is no longer surprised that her son has returned from an alien war and with the status of God of Fights. Perhaps this could have been the end of the series after almost 170 episodes, but no. This nuke continues to come out after 6 months to a year and goes to widescreen. My eyes kept going into convulsions the whole time I was watching this Square movie. Marucho opened a Bakugan interspace for the people of Nifia and Gandalia. A couple more chips were added to the game, Bakunano armor and Mectogans. Yeah, Drago loses control of himself and summons a Mectogan the size of a soccer field. He destroys the arena and disappears, and Den and Drago have dreams about Macmel and Ryazanoid. The hero becomes unsociable, makes a lot of mistakes, and literally nearly breaks the face of one of the new top-ranking contenders. It is occupied by the minions of that very same Macmel, Anubius and Ceylon. Shun will temporarily lead the desperate fighters starting from the 6th episode and will fight non-stop while Den and Drago learn to control their abilities and with the help of the sphere power, subdue Zendan. That's if anything the Mectogan from the beginning and Zendan the Titan, in fact an improved version, but more massive. Naturally, he does not dare to tell his friends about it, and Shun and Marucho question his decision to act on a hunch, reproaching him for his stubbornness and selfishness, saying that he will ruin himself and the team. At the same time, Nithya and Gandalia are attacked by Chaos Bakugans. Dan and Drago try to help, and together with Nithya's fighters, they mop up the invaders. My expectation was the appearance of the main villain, and it wasn't in vain, but it's still a long way from defeating him, and the heroes endure a draw from the battle. Earth wasn't far from collapse, so the heroes do have to reconcile and act together. Actually, the fight with Shun was very interesting to me. The heroes were given personalities even better. After all, they are not just empty nesters and friends of the protagonist, but independent units that can think and decide for themselves. Thank you to the authors. A sphere appears above the city from which dozens of Mectogans fall out. Their task was to get to the core of the Earth. All the fighters, including Kid's support from Gandalia, destroy the Mectogans. All the while, under the guise of Macmel and Darek, stood Barodius Razanoid. Dan and Drago were able to activate the code key and arrive at the final evolution, the Pyros Fusion Dragonoid. After an external threat to Earth from the Bakugans, the good part of them moved to Earth and built a Bakugan city with the humans, where they all live together in harmony. Hans, the dark horse among the fighters with his Bakugan Chaos Reptech, appears in the arena. In the fight with Drago, they counter-energy activated a portal from which 4 Mectogans appeared, Cordogan, Slykerak, Exostriker, and Manlibor. To the aid of the heroes were supposed to come their Mectogans, but a new machine arrives, Dragonoid Destroyer, an even more massive machine. Here is a rough sketch of what the perspective of these tanks looks like compared to Drago. It quickly deals with all the Mectogans and then disappears, and with it Hans. However, Reptek is left behind and decides to temporarily become Dan's Bakugan. Suddenly, a new villain, Sage, appears, with a remarkably similar face and hair color to Hans. And with him, 9 evil Bakugans. An entire season is devoted to fighting the Sage, and the heroes slowly realize that Hans and the Sage are one and the same person, but all along they had an alter ego created artificially by Cordegan to revive his brothers and in addition to take revenge on Den and Drago. and allow the four brothers to become Mechtanium the Destroyer. They defeat the Dragonoid Destroyer and set the condition to Earth. Either you destroy all your Bakugans, or in 12 hours we will destroy you along with them. Hans defeats his alter ego, leads 9 Bakugans and puts on the Sage suit. Mechtanium the Destroyer becomes the next target, but almost all of the Bakugans are killed at his hands, and Hans and Petadron escape into the dimension of death. They have a duel with Den and Drago, and thus resolve the personal issue of hatred for Petadron and friends being imprisoned by Drago's ancestors in the Death Dimension. They co-op and enter the Time Stream, where they see New Vestroy and Bakugan City destroyed. Professor Vortex and Petadron sacrifice themselves so that the heroes can get out in the time stream they need. They summon their Mectogans. Incidentally, Hans and Reptek also summon their own. Dragonoid Destroyer gathers energy from the friendship of all the humans and Bakugans, transforming into Genosis Dragonoid, the first Bakugan to destroy Mectavio's Destroyer. He gives Drago and Den a final admonishment and disappears. Hans has a friendly fight with Den, gets his defeat, and the heroes celebrate the victory at the party. Den and Drago need a rest after such epic adventures, and at the end they promise to give the way to new fighters so that they can reach the same heights. Probably one of the most epic anime or cartoons I've watched. Such a wide and huge audience that was connected across distances by the Bakugans. I remember me and my friends building a collection from the toys, trying to play by the rules and use boost cards. I even got beat up on the street and snatched a couple of them, but that's okay. So long journey that ended with a satisfying ending. There is still a fair share of disappointment though. It's a 2019 relaunch where the anime turned a childish production of fights and shouting, disgusting 3D animation combined with 2D. Honestly, I was disappointed. Again, the capitalist world and business tried to destroy the cultural heritage of an entire generation. Bakugan was a legendary cartoon, but it couldn't pass the test of time. The concept was good, but the questionable realization of people in the anime as partners pumped up. After all, Bakugan fights and every battle is real, right? Then would shouting out a person's abilities help solve anything? Are you saying it's an ability activation? I don't think so. But even with this disadvantage, there were others. The protracted plot, when one fight or just empty characters tried to stretch for several episodes. All this made me lose interest, but the dynamics and plot twists, where the villains, now and then became good, then evil, such as Hans, Kid, Nurzak and others. It kept me believing, and in 2007 to 2010 years it worked. But now, unfortunately, it is the maximum will make you think, and what are smoking these authors? Thanks for the fact that the team of desperate fighters made not just bedfellows of the protagonist and spelled out their personalities and made conflicts between them, because it was really important, at least for me. And to finish, I want to say that I watched the whole Bakugan cartoon, and it's a really touching story. Have a good wind! But even with this disadvantage, there were others, the drawn-out plot, when one fight or just empty characters tried to stretch for several episodes. All this made me lose interest, but the dynamics and plot twists when the villains now and then became good, then evil, such as Hans Baby, Nurzak and others, it kept me in faith, and in 2007 to 2010 years it worked, but now unfortunately, it is the maximum will make you think. And what are these authors smoking? Thank you for making the team of desperate fighters not just bedfellows of the main character, but spelling out their personalities and making conflicts between them, because it was really important, at least for me. And in conclusion, I want to say that I watched the whole Bakugan cartoon, and it's a really touching story. Have a nice breeze.